Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Sharpe Takes. Today I'm delighted to have as a guest Neil Odell, who is a long-term school board member and a recent past president of the State School Boards Association. I think you still serve on that association, if the website's correct.
The website is correct. So I finished up my term as immediate past president a couple years ago. And then the spot for regional rep in the Windsor area opened up again. And I said that I wouldn't step in front of anybody, but then nobody stepped forward, Dave. So,
Yes.
so I put my name forward, and yeah, so I'm back as a Windsor area regional rep.
You're a great asset, and I'm glad you're serving on the state board.
Thank you very much.
So the bio I saw of you didn't tell me much about your background. Did you grow up in Vermont, or?
No, I did not. I actually grew up in upstate New York, so about halfway between Binghamton and Albany. My dad sold farm equipment. My mom was a school nurse, but very rural upbringing, a town even smaller than a lot of towns in Vermont. I think we had probably like 500 folks, really.
Wow. So what got you up to Vermont?
The shortest story is went to college. Out of college, got my one and only job offer with AT&T in New Jersey, and I was like, I'll take it. And I left upstate New York and I headed to New Jersey, and we were there. I was there for a good 10 years, and toward the end, I started to think to myself, I'm like, it's really crowded around here. And it took me a long time to sort of wrap my head around. Where I grew up in upstate New York, there wasn't a whole lot to do. And I just wanted to get out. After being in New Jersey for a while, I kind of realized that what I left was really what I wanted. And that prompted my wife and I to look for places to move to. And Vermont had always ranked at the top of the list. My wife and I actually were married at Killington before we even moved up to Vermont. I got a lot of Vermont stories that I could tell you, but and so Vermont always held a special place for us. And when it came time to look for something to get out of New Jersey, things just worked out great, and ended up moving up to Norwich.
That's fantastic.
Yeah,
Thank you for coming and being part of this. So the nature of this show is thinking about public education. Where are we at now? Where do we want to be? And how do we get there? And how do we pay for it? So the world has changed this week, big time. It's 40 degrees outside. The sap is running. And an overwhelming number of school districts passed their school budgets. School boards and superintendents listened to voters and did what was necessary to bring in a budget that voters could support. And today the governor's shifted his conversation from where it was to talking about now we have to talk about outcomes, that our students need to have better outcomes. So what's your perception of where we are today?
I do believe we're at a crossroads. I will say, though, listen, I heard on the radio this morning, VPR, the majority of budgets passed for school boards yesterday, and that's a great situation to be in. But I also think what that shows, right, is that school board members responded. Like the governor called for restraint in spending. And school board members heard that message, and this isn't the first time. Several years ago, a governor had the same message. School board members heard it, and they responded, and they do care. They care not only about their kids, but they also care about their fiscal responsibility as well too. And I think that's what we saw in the budgets that passed yesterday was, board members get it. It's always a balance between trying to provide what's right for the kids, but also what the community can afford. I think it's a little ironic, right, that, board members respond, and so the governor has to find a new thing to call them out for this time, right? And, we are at a pivotal moment, though.
Pivoting to what?
Well, so that's a great question. Pivoting to, maybe a change in governance, pivoting to perhaps a change in how we fund and pay for education, pivoting to who makes the rules regarding public education in the state of Vermont, pivoting to, are we going to expand our school choice, our school voucher program, or are we going to try to make some adjustments there? So obviously, Governor put a lot of stuff out on the table at the beginning of the session, and I think the challenge right now is to work through each of those things, right? I do get the sense that perhaps that funding piece is likely to be the one that maybe gets some traction this session, and we might see some stuff happen with that. So,
The foundation formula, you think that'll work?
do I think it'll work? I think it's going to depend on a lot of things, right? The devil is always in the details, and I think for the foundation formula piece, it's obviously going to matter about, what is that dollar amount? How much are schools going to be receiving in a foundation formula? Will they be able to raise additional funds beyond that? Will there be restrictions on whether or not they can raise additional funds beyond that? How will local communities respond to that? I can give you an example in my own local district. So
Please.
our district a little bit unique. We're an interstate school district in Norwich. Our K-6 actually operates in Vermont, in Norwich, but our kids in 7 through 12 go actually across the river to New Hampshire for both middle school and high school. It's part of the Dresden Interstate School
Through
District.
Dartmouth High School?
We call it Hanover High School.
Oh, Hanover.
Dartmouth, that is,
Yeah.
Hanover is the town where Dartmouth College is, but it's Hanover High School. And so we share the costs of middle school and high school with our friends across the river in Hanover, right? And those costs are apportioned out based on the percentage of student split in the student body. And typically over the years, it's been about 1/3 Norwich kids, 2/3 Hanover kids. And so we just split the budget based on that percentage difference. When we take a look at the foundation formula and some of the numbers that have been shared with us from the administration as to what the impact would be on local school districts, we see that at the governor's amount, so $13,200 per student, we're going to get shorted quite a bit of money based on what we're spending per student right now. And so we're trying to figure out, if that were to be the solution that goes into place, how do we adjust? How do we react to that? Because two things. One is it wouldn't meet what our current per pupil spending is right now. But secondly, in the interstate compact, I'm not sure that we'd be able to meet our obligation to pay what we need to pay into the Dresden school system based on the arrangement that we've got. It's going to be a challenge. I know legislators are thinking about a foundation system, but with different numbers. And higher numbers are going to be good. I'm just not convinced that the governor's proposal, when it came to that foundation formula, he said that those numbers were based on studies and analysis and ideal school sizes, but they just didn't line up right. Nothing really sort of made sense in those numbers.
Well, is his plan, or is it the legislature's plan to weight that number, right? So what's your poverty rating? What did that do to your school district?
So I will be completely honest and transparent with you. Norwich is a wealthy district, right? We've got a lot of, high earners in town. Housing prices are pretty high. And so what that translates to is a school system where we have very low numbers of students that are economically disadvantaged, right? So much so that we actually fell below the threshold for Title I funds last year.
Wow.
It's swinging back, so we anticipate that those Title I monies will be coming back next year. But from a student weighting perspective, right, we're not getting a whole lot of advantage from the weights in terms of, economically disadvantaged kids. We do have English language learners, right? So that's there. But if we step back for a second, Act 127, which was the change in those student weights, really severely impacted Norwich. And we were the single district in the state that saw the biggest negative change as a result of that legislation. As a result, we get a cent discount off of our tax rate that phases out over 5 years. So last year, I just delivered, our town meeting was Monday night, and I just had to deliver the budget, and we talked through all of that stuff. A year prior, I was telling folks we were looking at an 18% tax rate increase. This year's story is a little bit better, in part because, and this, right, the complexity of the education funding system. When we spend less overall as a state, then everybody's tax rate can come down. So this year, our tax rate looked to be down about almost 3% from the last year. But last year was an 18% increase.
So you're talking about a 15% increase?
50% increase over 2 years. And that is with the cent discount that we've been provided.
Wow.
So, there were certain estimates that it really depends on how all this stuff plays out. If we stick with the current formula,
Yeah.
I think over 5 years, Norwich could be looking at, somewhere between like a 30 to 40% tax rate increase if we keep the existing funding
Structure.
model and structure and
Yeah.
formula. Yeah.
So there's quite a bit of interest in changing that formula.
Well, maybe, right? So as hard as that was on the Norwich community, that budget passed last year. And I am super thankful to voters and acknowledged at town meeting night on Monday, even though, there were people obviously that voted against the budget, but it passed. And I was like, whether you voted for or against the budget, I'm pretty sure everybody paid their property taxes, which gave the school system the money that they needed in order to, run the program that we run. And so I'm super thankful to folks that endured that pain of that tax rate increase and made that contribution to the school system. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then going forward under the governor's plan, where do your high school kids go? Are they going to continue to go over to Hannaford, or does everything have to stay inside the state?
So when the governor's plan sort of dropped, we saw that there was this proposed model for 5 school districts all across the state. If you looked a little bit closer at the map, there were 2 districts that were carved out, and those were the 2 interstate districts in Vermont. So
Rivendell,
yeah. They're just to the north of us.
Yeah.
The difference between us is Rivendell is actually a K-12 interstate district, and Dresden is only 712.
I see.
But the AOE, the governor's administration, I think acknowledged at the time that there was not a whole lot they could do with those interstate districts because those were actually formed through an act of Congress.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
And so the ability to change or modify those is going to require another act of Congress. And so while they say it's a 5-district model, really it's more like a 7-district model. There's a limitation on what they can do with those interstate districts.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if the funding model changes, that's going to put pressure on both Dresden and Rivendell to figure out like how do we navigate that change in funding. If the end result is that we're going to get less revenue than we're getting currently, then what does that mean as our interstate obligation in that arrangement? So.
Well, presumably, I can't imagine them not allowing. Let me put it a different way. It seems to me that if communities feel like they need to spend more on education, they're going to find a way to do that, regardless of what the foundation amount is.
Maybe, right? Because, all of this is being worked out now in the legislature as we speak. But my understanding from the language that was included in the bill and what the proposal from the governor is that there was likely going to be a cap on the amount of money that you could raise locally above the foundation amount. I saw 2 caps. One was like 3% or 5%. So I think that they're entertaining different cap ideas on that. They ultimately maybe they decide to scrap that and go a different way. But I think the challenge is, right, how do you allow for maybe increased spending above the foundation amount and still not run afoul of the Brigham decision?
Yeah.
And that's the challenge that lawmakers have, right?
I think it is a big challenge. Yeah, absolutely. So looking at your situation in Dresden and looking at the state plan and using your expertise, which is valuable, where do you think we should end up? 5 districts, 25 districts, as one of the House committees has proposed. Any change in districts? What changes? Where should we go from here?
I don't know where we should go. I do think that some consolidation of governance is could be worthwhile. And I'll just relate my own local experience with this. I do think that when the governance model is a little bit too small, right? When you don't have purview over a larger group, there's some inefficiencies associated with that. I will admit, like in our district, so I can give you a little funny story. When I ran for the school board the first time, I did not realize that when you ran for the Norwich school board, you also got on the Dresden school board, and then there was an SAU 70 school board. I was so naive that I didn't know. So I ran for one board, and I ended up getting on three.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. And so I do think that, like even locally, we've talked about this governance structure that's just somewhat inefficient, right? We have multiple board meetings with multiple boards every month, and we've always talked about, is there a way we could consolidate that so that not only board members, but almost more importantly, administrators aren't going out like, 6 to 8, evenings every month just for board meetings.
Yeah.
And invariably, at every board meeting, we're almost talking about the exact same things every time. And so I do think that there's maybe some form of consolidation of those governance structures that could be a benefit to Vermont.
Isn't that what Act 46 was supposed to do? But it doesn't affect Dresden because it's a federal district?
So,
is that what's happening
well,
here?
so when it came to Act 46, Dresden was exempt because of their interstate school district status. And, I think the agency realized just the complications of trying to fiddle with an interstate district when it was an act of Congress. That being said, because I was on the board back then too, Norwich participated in Act 46 consolidation discussions with our neighbors. We were viewing this as, and I think a lot of school districts viewed this as, we don't want to be told what to do. And if we've got an opportunity to have some discussions with our neighbors, like maybe we can come to some agreement that works for everybody rather than the state telling us what we need to do. So we sat down with Sharon and Stratford and Thetford, all of the districts that are right around Norwich, and had these discussions. I think what it highlighted, though, and what we've seen across the state in a lot of places, right, is that local communities really value their local school systems, right? And if the configurations are different, so in our case, like Sharon, they have school choice for, middle and high school levels. Thetford, also a tuitioning town, although all of their kids are guaranteed to attend Thetford Academy. Stratford was another place where they had school choice in the upper grades. And when Act 46 said, if you're going to merge, everybody's got to have the same structure.
Yeah.
It almost made it like it was impossible for those local school districts to be able to collaboratively come to an agreement because nobody wanted to give up what they had.
I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think that you could have a school district where Thetford students had vouchers and Norwich kids didn't.
Right.
That's against the federal law or state law.
And that was the challenge, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to bring these disparate systems and try to bring them all together under a common model, that's going to require a lot of give and take. And I think that amount of give and take was a little bit too much, not just locally for the groups that were involved in our discussions, but statewide, like all other districts were having these same discussions. And a lot of them came to the conclusion, like, no, we don't want to give up what we have. These are tough conversations, right? I understand that, local schools can be the hub of a community and people hate to see them sort of disappear or change. It's tough. Those are tough discussions.
And in our county here in Addison County, we have one community, Lincoln, that has vouchers for its upper grades. Runs an elementary school, K through 6, and then tuitions beyond that. So even if we thought about a county school district, let alone 5, we're talking about 14. Are there 14 counties, I think? Plus the 2, right?
Yep. Yeah,
so it's really 16. But if we talked about an Addison County school district, we would be, and I think the governor either deliberately or maybe inadvertently backed himself into a corner. If you're going to do that, then you're going to have to either take vouchers away from Lincoln students or give them to all the other kids in Addison County, right?
Yeah, right. So that's one of the challenges, then if we use that as a segue to talk a little bit about the voucher
Yeah,
program,
let's do that.
right, statewide. But so I will. Yeah, we're here today to talk about my participation in a group called Friends of Vermont Public Education. Right, we formed a little over a year ago, established ourselves as a nonprofit, and we're basically advocating that any school that receives public money needs to follow the same set of rules and regulations. We do think that, that measure of accountability, so the transparency, the accountability associated with the public school system also is affordability for the system, right? If everybody is operating under the same set of rules, if we know what, the finances are for a private school versus a public school, that it's just better for taxpayers. It's better for how we spend our dollars. I think the governor's proposal, some would argue, right, that it's actually lessening school choice, lessening the voucher program. We actually think that it could potentially expand it in a pretty dramatic way. And I don't believe that that's good for the state of Vermont. And we have seen in studies that have been done in numerous other states, expanding the voucher program, expanding, where these taxpayer dollars can go, has actually led to some pretty significant increases in education spending in those states, almost to the point where they're like, we got to, back off or stop because this is killing us from a budget perspective. And I have no reason to suspect that Vermont wouldn't see the same outcomes if we were to expand our voucher program in the state.
So financially, it may not be viable. How about from a Brigham perspective? What kind of is just giving every child the same dollar amount provide equity, or is there still some big problems in terms of rural and urban, in terms of availability of various schools?
Yeah, so I'm not an attorney, so to sort of comment on these various things and how they relate to the Brigham decisions. I probably ought to don't take Neil's opinion on this as legal fact, but I think one of the challenges with the foundation formula, and then we take a look at Brigham, right? The idea was equity of educational opportunity. One of the problems that I see in my own mind is that how the public education system sort of in Vermont has developed over the years. My school district, I will fully admit, like our teachers are one of the top paid teachers in the state. And it's just based on negotiated settlements that have happened over the years, the influence of the Vermont NEA on, wages and benefits. And it's quite different than in some other schools, particularly up in the Northeast Kingdom, right? Their teacher salaries are different than ours and lower. And so the foundation formula, in my mind, doesn't account for that difference between school districts, because when 60 to 80% of your budget is salaries and benefits, those differences between schools can really matter in terms of per pupil spending.
Yeah.
So that same 13.2 in Norwich is going to get you a whole lot less than maybe that same 13.2 in another district where salaries and benefits are much lower. And so I think maybe there's a potential there for some equity issues even around a foundation formula, just based on how, our school systems have evolved over the years.
Yeah, I think the Brigham decision does play into all of the financial considerations that individuals and administrations and school districts are grappling with, and the legislature are grappling with at this point, because I think we learned under Act 6068 that the disparity between property wealthy communities and property poor communities dramatically reduced. Yeah. And it was my understanding a few years ago, I don't know how things have changed recently, it was my understanding that the remaining gap between towns is more related to income than it is property value. And I think maybe Norwich is the example of that. You have wealth, you have families of means, let me put it that way, that have a high value for education, have and are willing to spend the money to have quality teachers, pay them more than other teachers and have deliver more resources to the students in your community. And that's based not so much on the property value in Norwich, but it is based on the educational value and the income of your residents. Does that ring true at all?
I think it does ring true. I mean, I will say though, we still have folks in Norwich that pay based on income sensitivity, right? So there's still that, we still have that to deal with. But yeah, by and large, Norwich is a wealthy community. I will admit that.
Yeah.
But along with that, comes what I consider to be a well-funded education system, and our outcomes, they're pretty good.
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, I was reviewing some data, even at town meeting on Monday night, just, how are the kids doing? And we've got kids, third, fourth, fifth, sixth grade, both in ELA and math, 80% and higher proficient and above in those categories.
That's fantastic.
So I do think that, enough money and then money well spent does get you good outcomes in education. And I think our school system in Marion Cross kind of proves that.
That was one of my aha moments or thoughts when I heard the conversations today shifting away from we need to lower taxes to we need to have better incomes. Well, doesn't that say we need more resources for pay our teachers better, hire more quality teachers, have smaller classrooms, and actually do those kinds of things to raise our test scores and our outcomes, not lower taxes?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly the data shows, right, having a high quality teacher in front of those kids on a daily basis is really going to make a big difference. And then to be able to afford and attract those high quality teachers is certainly going to be part of the equation. I think you brought up class sizes. I think class sizes are important, but you can have class sizes that are too small.
Yeah.
Right. And so I do think that, in Vermont, like we've got some schools with some pretty small class sizes. And we probably ought to be looking at that, right? I understand people, like small class sizes because I think it's good for kids, but at some point, these are sort of micro class sizes, and we really ought to be taking a look at that to see if the money is well spent, and that those kids are actually getting a good quality education in that environment. So
money well spent. Are they getting a good education? Take a look at it. Who's going to look at that? Is that? I mean,
so you would hope it was the AOE, right? But I think our AOE has got some very serious challenges right now to be able to meet what we need from them. They're not able to provide the data to back up some of these, these things that we want to be able to dig into and look at. They haven't been able to meet just a lot of their own requirements. I can give you 2 examples locally. We rely on data from the AOE to try to figure out what the estimated tax rate is going to be. And that's particularly in the area of what we call long-term weighted ADM, the long-term weighted student count, right? Because it goes in the denominator for figuring out what your tax rate is.
Absolutely.
Back at the beginning of the budget season, AOE provided us a long-term weighted ADM number that was almost 100 students higher than our number from the previous year. And when you think about that, you're like, my first reaction was, oh my gosh, that's awesome, right? Because it just drove our tax rate down. And then my immediate second thought was,
come from?
That number's wrong.
Yeah.
It was clearly wrong because our enrollment didn't change. Right. We had the same number of kids in the system, year over year, give or take 1 or 2. But to have that long-term weighted ADM number shoot up by over 100 kids.
Yeah.
And so we went back and we were like, your number's wrong. And they're like, okay. And they did some work behind the scenes and they came back and it came down by like 5 kids. And I'm like, the number is wrong again. And the issue that I have is that they didn't realize that the number was wrong. We had to tell them that.
Yeah.
But secondly, the timing of this whole thing meant that we weren't able to react to those changes in numbers from a budget perspective to worry about the per pupil spending number.
And what your tax rate's going to be
and
in
what your tax
community.
rate's going to be.
Yeah.
So the what we ended up doing was we had to basically put a budget out, like send it to the printers so it could get on the ballot and be ready for town meeting when we didn't really know what the proposed tax rate was going to be. And that final number from the AOE didn't come to us until the end of January. And even then, Dave, the number was wrong. We knew it was wrong because the data that we gave to them was not reflected back to us in that ADM count that they sent to us. But the AOE pressured us and pressured all school districts across the state to sign off on those numbers. And so we signed off on them, but we put a little caveat in the sign off that says, we know that this number is wrong.
Huh.
And so, if the governor's proposal says we need to shift more of this work to the AOE, they're not even doing the work now.
Yeah.
Like, I don't understand under what scenario the governor thinks that the AOE is going to be able to complete the work that he's asking them to do in this new bill when they can't even complete the work that they're required to do now.
Wow. And at that note, we've run out of time. The time really goes fast when we start talking education outcomes and policy. And I want to thank you very much for joining us today. Good luck with your group and with supporting public education throughout the state. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Dave. It's been a pleasure.
And that's it for another edition of Sharpe Takes. I hope you enjoyed it.